Thomas, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us today. We're really interested to explore what a community land trust is and why it's such a great idea. Just to disclose our interest from a community housing perspective, we think they're fantastic. We wish there were many more of them. And we particularly love the fact that they are there to hold that affordability in the hands of the community perpetually, rather than being lost within one cycle. So why would people want to get involved with a community land trust, and what is it? Can you just assume that somebody has never encountered that structure before?
Yes, so we were set up with that purpose, as you've identified, of holding land in perpetuity. And the idea behind that is we can help retain the affordability of land for future generations. If you look at what's happened with house prices generally over the last 20 years and even going further back than that, but particularly over the last 20 years, prices have accelerated rapidly. And one of the key parts of that is the land component of that cost. So if we can hold land and make sure it's always available for housing, we hope it will always be affordable housing, and it can be retained for community benefit in that way.
Yeah, great. And so you're operating here in the Waikato region. You've had some support from the local territorial authority. Is that the City Council?
Yes, so Hamilton City Council was the driver, I suppose, for setting up the Waikato Community Lands Trust, and they set aside some initial funding. We had some initial challenges with that funding, it's fair to say, because it was initially earmarked solely for land purchase. And of course, that didn't involve anything around housing provision or land development. So one of the learnings there is thinking about the scope of that funding. So it couldn't, on one reading, originally extend to even putting a spade in the ground. But where we got to was working quite closely with council to get that funding arrangement made more fit for purpose. So we used that initial grant from council towards the purchase of some existing units, and I'll come back to the reasons for that. And then we've been able to use that as leverage to acquire some more units in a block. So what we found is there were some existing units in this market which were at a very good price available, and we compared that to the cost of establishing new housing, and the cost difference was massive. So we decided the best place to start is with these existing units.
And so tell me, from the perspective of a household who's accessing housing in the situation where the underlying land is held in a community land trust, what would they notice as the difference between what you're offering and what they could go and find in the market?
So, well, the market's a amorphous beast in some ways, but essentially we're looking at offering a whole lot of different types of products to people. So one of them would be an affordable rental product. One of them would be a leasehold comparable to a secure home type product. And we're also looking at potentially over time more shared equity type products. And again, these will be familiar to people like you, perhaps not to everyone. But what we're within the framework of retaining ownership of the land, we're hoping there can be different options available for different people. So to give one classic example, people might under a leasehold product acquire the house on the land, but not underlying ownership of the land.
But that immediately would be a massive difference. That would be typically in any given part of New Zealand half the price for the same home. If we're thinking of, let's say, a family home, a 4-bedroom home here in the Hamilton region, one next to the other, one on the leasehold arrangement, same construction, same house, same street, same orientation, one would be half or less than half the cost of the other, wouldn't it?
That's the intention, that's the goal, that there is that massive price difference, and one is affordable to people in a way that the other, unfortunately now today, is not. I think, this issue of leasehold delivery of housing is a really important one, again, for New Zealand Inc.
Yeah.
And one of the things that is a major impediment to that is banking policies on leasehold. So if we can get those shifting the thinking around them, that will be extremely valuable to increasing the spread of ownership, the ability to deliver affordable owned housing, and getting people out of a very challenging rental market into something more permanent. So I applaud moves in that direction, and I think other banks need to pick up on that too. I also think central government needs to pay much more attention to the difficulties of residential leasehold property. There's been some court cases that have come out around the difficulties of large rent reviews, and thinking more about that this is not the same as a commercial lease. This is something quite different to housing, is really important from, again, that whole of New Zealand point of view. I think also important to remember that leasehold is only going to ever be one of a suite of products. And I think it's fair to say, talking to younger people, they will say, well, we want to own a house. And I think they should have the option of a leasehold product. They should have the option of a fee simple freehold product as well. And so it's really important that we don't just say, young New Zealanders, you have limited options. That is all we're going to make available to you. We have to think more broadly than that about how we're actually going to deliver to future generations what older generations have enjoyed. There shouldn't be any reason for that to be any different, or for their aspirations to ownership to be any different. Having said that, yes, completely applaud the notion that there are organisations aiming to deliver more secure and more permanent housing in all its different forms to those in the missing middle, we call it sometimes, and ensuring that they can have housing choices of more permanency and certainty as well.
Are you seeing in the work that you're doing a drop in demand, a steady state, or an increase in demand for more affordable housing supply in the Hamilton region?
I think there's an increase in demand. It's fair to say. There's still a lot of need out there, and I think it's unfortunate that so much of the media focuses on either extreme need, let's call it that, or house prices going up and down, as if they must go up because that's the metric of success. And we're very conscious, and this will relate to the continuum discussions from a Waikato Housing Initiative perspective, but the Waikato Community Lands Trust is focused on a small part of that continuum. But it's a very important part for a lot of people, and it is important that we don't get too focused on one extreme or the other, and think about how the middle of that continuum works.
Absolutely agree with you. It can be quite confusing, I think, for the general public, because they see the media obsession with house price increases and are led to believe that that's a good thing, yet sometimes don't connect the dots to the flip side of that, which we're seeing across the country, which is quite significant growth in street dwelling and homelessness from Invercargill to Kaitaia and everywhere in between.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, and again, that's the importance of understanding there aren't just two extremes. There are a whole lot of things in the middle, and really they matter to people, and it's really important to have that whole of system thinking so that we can understand where different ways of providing housing fit into that.
Can I ask, if I said to you, November 2024, Community Housing Funding Agency launches, a few weeks ago, Minister Chris Bishop announces government support for Community Housing Funding Agency. Does any of that mean anything to you?
I have heard about these announcements because Waikato Community Lands Trust is not CHP at the moment, and partly because at the end of last year we were very focused on completing an acquisition. We haven't completely caught up with what's happening, but we have in fact a memorandum of understanding in place with Habitat for Humanity. So we working with their central region people around how to utilise or tap into the changes in the space.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, because it's a significant development. It's effectively the LGFA for the community housing sector, which will allow access to much lower cost debt, which hopefully there's no silver bullets in housing, as you well know, but it's yet another system improvement in terms of reducing the cost of delivering and owning new supply. Can I ask, you've indicated you have a partnership with Habitat, so does that mean they are looking after the tenancy management and property management arrangements and working with you where you own the underlying land?
Yes, that's our current arrangement, and the reason for that is I suppose the limitations of setup and trying to avoid duplication.
Yeah, right.
So we identified when we were set up that there are some places in New Zealand where there are almost no providers of community housing. In fact, you look at the Waikato, there are a number of actors in different parts of the continuum, and we knew that Habitat knew what they were doing, and they've got a lot of experience with tenancy management and with property management. And we thought, well, let's tap into that rather than trying to duplicate something ourselves. And the comment comes up sometimes that there's no point in us trying to get their staff to do the job that they could do where they are now. So that's actually worked very well from a tenancy management point of view. They've got a lot of existing knowledge and skills, and the ability to draw on those from a management point of view, and also draw on their knowledge and existing experience in that area has been great.
Fantastic. We're huge fans of collaboration and
Yes.
not reinventing the wheel. And
Absolutely.
so commend you for that. I'd just like to touch on inclusionary zoning, value capture and inclusionary housing. We've been following and strongly supporting, just to sort of state our position as community housing sector, strongly supportive of value capture and inclusionary housing and zoning provisions, and particularly as we look to the near and medium term future, intending to quite consistently advocate for that at a national legislative level to de-risk it for the local territorial authorities who are prone to litigious challenges from various parts of the sector. What's your view on inclusionary, and could that perhaps be a source of new land supply to grow the community land trust movement in New Zealand?
Yes, so absolutely. Wearing the hat, different hats, one of them being for Waikato Community Lands Trust, one of them being for Waikato Housing Initiative, very pro-inclusionary zoning. And there are a few different reasons for that. There's an obvious reason for, say, a community lands trust, in that it can provide a future supply of land, which then can be held for affordable purposes. One of the other things I think we're not quite caught up with in New Zealand is these are very common arrangements overseas. I was talking to a planner in England, for example, and she was saying, well, if someone wants to do a new development, it's not 10% or 20% affordable, it might be 40% affordable, 20% community provision, and then what's left is for the market. I think one of the really important things with inclusionary zoning is remembering that we need the market to do its bit to have the whole continuum work well. And again, one of the key things from a housing initiative perspective is that government and community providers are doing around about 10, maybe a bit more % of what's going on in the overall continuum.
Possibly less.
Possibly less.
Yeah.
The market is doing 90%. So using that 90% lever that the market has is very, very important.
Yeah.
I will say I'm a little bit wary sometimes the term value capture, because I think it's interpreted by developers as another way of saying tax.
Yes.
And I think it is important to think about what we're trying to achieve and what these terms mean. I think the key thing with inclusionary zoning is it's about achieving a win-win result. The developer is getting an improved outcome and the community is getting an improved outcome. Probably works better in some contexts than others, perhaps. But it's also important to keep in mind the whole continuum. So we don't want to necessarily have an adverse incentive to simply encourage development at large scale.
Yeah.
We want to remember small development, and a whole lot of small development is really important as well. So I think, we need to understand there are definitely private and community benefits from development, and how we apply those across housing need is very, very important. At the same time, we don't want to do things which are going to reduce supply. So having that consistent approach is very important. I will say the legal challenges are a concern, and one of the most important things the government can do as part of RMA reform, which is still on their agenda, is to make it very clear that these arrangements are proper, legitimate, and get that written into RMA reform.
Thank you. That's helpful, and a good segue at a local level to a conversation about the Waikato Housing Initiative. In some ways, from our perspective, from the outside, it's a very significant and helpful example of whakawhanaungatanga, really, strong relationships where you've got the private development sector, you've got the community housing sector, you've got mana whenua, you've got the territorial local authorities, all sitting at a table. And in some way, shape or form, they've been sitting at that same table for nearly 9 years now, building relationships, building trust. We see what you're doing here in the Waikato as a beacon of hope for other regions around New Zealand, particularly as the government, this government in particular, is looking to take a more place-based approach to housing delivery and thinking about, well, how do we empower and enable and support local decision-making around what's the best supply-side solution, given a good and comprehensive understanding of the persistent unmet housing need. Can you share your thoughts about the Waikato Housing Initiative and what the future might look like?
So first of all, there's massive benefit in getting those different voices in the room together for its own sake. So hearing those different perspectives that people have, different drivers people have, is just inherently useful as a collaborative exercise. More critically, one of the things it allows is it avoids that issue of people saying this is someone else's fault or this is someone else's problem. And I think at a news media type level, you do get central government saying, well, local government should sort this out, and local government saying central government should sort this out. And by actually having those conversations, you can identify who's not sorting things out and what they can do. I think behind that is the importance, particularly in my view, of the policy levers that are available. So we talk about our three big rocks and so on, and no doubt Lale has covered those in his discussions. But I think policy is a really important lever and under-considered as a lever for helping with the delivery of housing, and in particular the delivery of affordable housing. And I come back to that point I made before. We have a continuum from homelessness through to full market. We spend a lot of time in some contexts talking a lot about a very small part of that continuum around government community provision, and the large aspect that is market delivery of housing really needs more attention from a policy point of view. So again, the danger is sometimes that local government or even central government will focus too much on the funding levers they have for direct provision of housing rather than the policy levers they have which apply to the whole of the market. And that includes what kind of houses can be delivered, what kind of housing is enabled by a plan, what arrangements can be put in place to upzone or provide for inclusionary zoning, and all those sorts of arrangements. They're all very important. Digging down, you get into the process of how we plan for housing, quite separately from how we fund it. Our planning system needs a lot of attention in terms of how and where housing is delivered. There's a whole lot of other issues around that in terms of private covenants and so on, which need attention. But our big focus has been on what the continuum looks like as a whole, and then looking at what that 90% of the market is delivering. And in reality, it's not delivering very many affordable homes at all. We know the stats on that, and it's very minimal. But how do we encourage that to happen and make that happen through policy levers. And that's a really big part of what the WHI is focusing on.
Yeah, and on behalf of the housing system, I want to thank you for shining a light on that, because it's deeply insightful, and the role of good policy or bad policy is often underestimated. And I really appreciate the focus that you have on that sort of missing middle, or that enormous gap that exists. We have seen research recently. There are 300,000 or 400,000 households in New Zealand who could be classed as stressed renters, who are paying 40, 50 and 60% of their total combined gross household income on their rent. And that's an enormous number of people who could quite easily fall into needing far higher levels of subsidy and greater assistance from the government if we don't start to focus, as you are, on good solid policy that addresses that stressed renter market before it becomes a bigger problem and a much higher cost to us as New Zealand Inc. as a society.
Yeah, and put simply, it doesn't have to be that way.
No, we can make different choices.
We can make different choices, and pushing people towards those different choices is a really important part of it.
Look, we're aware, we've been briefed quite deeply on the current deficit of affordable housing in the Waikato region and what that looks like as we project that into the future, looking at current demographic trends and population growth. And there's very clearly a significant and growing need for additional affordable housing supply in the Waikato region for you to be able to adequately house all your people. What happens, what do things look like from your perspective if we don't focus on and address that issue in this context?
Where do I start? There's a whole lot of different issues there. One of the reasons, for example, that home ownership needs to remain an important aspiration is traditionally people have used home equity to do things like obtain business loans, business funding to establish new businesses and de-risk it from a bank point of view. So that's got an important impact on how people establish businesses and how the economy operates in the future. We find that fewer and fewer people can afford rental properties, and that has an impact for the overall net cost in terms of subsidies and in terms of where people can actually live. It has the potential to increase homelessness and reliance on the charitable sector, which has important flow-on effects. It also has obviously impacts on individuals. There'll be families who are driven to what we might call destitution or ongoing poverty, which means they can't provide for their families in the same way. I always think of people who are in, let's say, abusive relationships. If there aren't housing options they can afford, their options are curtailed, and that has an important impact on them and potentially their children. There's all kinds of adverse impacts from housing being unaffordable, and I'd hope that policymakers do take those impacts seriously. It's not. It is so unfortunate that we have this headline of increasing house prices as a great outcome for the country when there are so many adverse impacts that come from that of all kinds.
We had one of New Zealand's leading writers and journalists. I asked her that question. Rebecca McPhee's her name. And she sat and she looked straight in the eye. She looked me straight in the eyes and she said razor wire. She said gated communities, and there was just this. She had this horrible vision of a nation divided by property ownership. It was pretty upsetting, actually, because she's a very articulate and thoughtful person.
And it is so disappointing when we've been a country where home ownership and affordable housing has been such an important social goal for so long. I mean, it's amazing to read party manifestos from the 70s and things like that. And ownership for young people is held up as such a critical social goal. And yet we've seemed to have abandoned that idea altogether, and it's there's success and failure, and there's this perception of nothing in between. And that's really, really unfortunate. And it is an indictment on us as a country that we can't think differently about how our housing system works.
We can make different choices. We've
We
done
can.
it before.
We have to.
And we must, yeah. And it's interesting because historically we've seen governments out competing each other to try and do more in housing. That was the glory period you talked about, and then we've had around 30 or 40 years now of the opposite. So we can turn it around. It's just political will, really.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, thank you.
No problem.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.